Dash community meeting. Today, I put the agenda on the screen here, and we had a couple of different things to talk about, not in any particular order. So we have, a SAI PTF update from Intel, and Mukesh had a work item he wanted to talk about, and Keysight had a small blurb they wanted to talk about with respect to the pipe CI/CD testing harness and pipeline. And then I wanted to point out something later about the runners and the Azure Container Registry if we had time. So I'm going to turn off my camera. And Reshma, did you want to get started with Anton and your crew?
Yeah, I'll just give a brief introduction because it's been some time, and then hand it off to both Anton and Volodymyr. So there is the SAI PTF, which is the SAI packet testing framework that we have added from Intel. It is an auto-generated Python-based data plane testing framework. The framework itself uses thrift wrapper functions to call C-based SAI functions in Python scripts. The main goal of the framework itself is to reduce the time spent on writing wrapper functions for SAI, which can be actually auto-generated based on SAI headers. So this work that we are doing here for Dash consists of two parts: the auto-generation framework itself using existing SAI meta infrastructure, and adding new PTF test cases using this new framework. In context, more specifically for Dash, it is required for us to adapt both auto-generated framework and the base test cases on platforms that have less ports than required by Sonic Switch, which are the Dash platforms, Dash devices. We have made this code changes at this time for the auto-generation framework to be adapted to Dash, as well as the base test cases, and Anton and Volodymyr will show what these changes are that have been done, and where are the changes in the framework and the test cases itself. And basically show the community how we can use these changes to start writing more test cases on top of it. Anton, would you like to please take over?
Yeah, sure. Second, I will share my screen. Okay, this is the screen right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically this is what I will tell right now. It's amendment to the Volodymyr's demo that he held in the past. Like what's new right now that we actually pushed those changes to the public repository, and you can pull them and try it on your own. And I will just want to remind actually what we've done. So like I have just a few slides to remind about the overall state of things that in the PTF test cases, and what we changed. So like the main idea of the PTF tests that we had for Sonic was that we had a class where we had a pre-setup which required 24 ports basically. So that's a SAI helper class. And here is actually an example of that setup. There was like there was involved 24 ports with a different pre-configuration, and actually each test case was using only subset of those ports. Like, but so that's the idea was that we did configuration once and then launched a number of test cases on the same setup, but taking only those ports that actually required for that test, for that specific scenario. That's a good approach, but with testing Dash, we had actually the problem that we do not have 24 ports and we cannot use that kind of approach. And we had to split standard 24 port setup into few smaller one, mostly for 2 ports, what we expected to have in the Dash. And so that means that instead of having one SAI helper class in the PTF framework, we will have multiple. pre-setups based on the test case, what test case requires. Here's actually like an example that we might have some small setup with 2 REF ports. We might have some small setup, for example, with lag if we need it, or just 2 ports unassigned with any pre-setup in the future. So those changes actually what Volodymyr showed on the demo last time, and right now we pushed it, and right now we verified that those changes in the PTF do not break anything for existing switch scenarios. So here's, for example, one let's say example of the class that is already pushed, and you can try it. It uses only 2 ports, for example, only 2 REF ports. It's part of the SAI REF test cases. It inherited from the simplified new test class that we created for Dash. I will show this actually on the GitHub in the repo, where in which file you can find it, what's going on there. And actually, right now we are doing that pre-setup directly in the test class. Like I will return to the part a little bit later. But like the main idea, what I want to like stress here is that instead of doing like child classes from the SAI helper as it was for all test cases in this framework before, right now we can change its behavior. And instead of using that standard 24-port setup for switch, we can inherit from simplified class, which do not contain that big pre-setup, and use a small one, what we need actually for the Dash use case. And yeah, so that's as I mentioned, all that stuff is pushed to the fork actually of the SAI test framework. So we'll probably do merge one. Everything is finished, everything is tested. Right now we are like still doing some changes there, fixes what we found so far. So here's the state that we SAI-base test with changes in the classes already pushed, SAI REF is already pushed, and we have already modified and ready to push the following test cases. I want also to emphasize that we do not rework all test scenarios, because not all of them are applicable for Dash, because multiple scenarios actually like may not be supported by Dash at all. We right now working on the underlay part only, and some scenarios might require more than 2 ports, like for example 5, 7 or so, and we also do not touch those test cases and keep them as is for now. Like in the future we will do. So like once we've done with pushing all underlay test cases, we will then switch to the overlay test. So here is the link, and I want actually to show the diff probably of that what is committed there. So I want to also please take note that this is a separate branch, Dash PTF. How to show diff? If I'm not mistaken, I need to create pull request for that. Okay, I will just let's look at this commit PTF SAI-base test, and what's new there is that SAI helper base is completely the same thing. Next, we added, by the way, additional, let's say, helper class. This is SAI helper utils mixin. We moved to all additional methods that are used in multiple places in the test framework. It will be used for as also one of the parent classes for the SAI helper, original SAI helper, and SAI helper simplified one. So that's just common methods like create, lag, members, destroy, and all that stuff. And take a look that this is new class that we added. It inherits utils and the SAI helper base class. And right now, we do not do any presetup here. So it's actually like contains like, let's say, 2 unassigned ports. What additional also was mentioned by Volodymyr on the demo, so it will skip test cases if there is a call to the ports that is not actually available for our device, let's say, because those port lists is taken from the SAI call. If we do not have ports, for example, with that number, then we are skipping that test case. SAI helper, like we using mixin, but in general, it's not changed at all. The only like different standard setup, the only difference is that we like using that helper functions to make it more readable and easier to read and more simplified way, like let's say. The rest, yet again, the same. So now let's look to the some test. SAI ref, what is already pushed here? Yeah. So what is the inherited from SAI helper? It means that this is all the test cases that designed for the Sonic switch with a 24 port setup. Is nothing changed here. And what's new here is that for the simplified one. Publish. Yeah, so here is it. L3 interface based LPM, for example. That's one example. It contains, if I'm not mistaken, few such classes. So that's configuration. We right now we keep it directly in the test class. We thought that probably if we have some configurations that are used in a number of different test suites, for example, that one is pretty standard one, then we might add some class in the SAI-based test next to the SAI helper, but it means that then we need to actually think and about the renaming of the original SAI helper class to some, for example, SAI helper standard presetup, SAI helper like ref 2 ports presetup, and so we keep this activity for the future when we see whether it's really like needed and what kind of the presetups we are using in our test framework. But I have to say that on the other hand, that the case that we have presetup directly in each test cases and then we have tear down also here, also a good point because we extend in that case our coverage by add and delete configuration part, because previously it was kind of one pre-configuration, multiple scenarios, and then one destroy configuration. Right now we will have multiple config, remove. It's also, I think it's good amendment to the existing coverage. So just to summarize, so right now SAI ref is already pushed. You can try it. You can see how to use SAI simplified class, how to do the presetup. You can take a look what's has been changed in the SAI-based test. And as the next steps, next few days, we will finish pushing all our few other test suites. So yeah, and want to remind that we do not convert all test cases. We are converting only so far underlay and what we expect to be supported in Dash. So that's it from my side. Please, if you have any question.
And how did you say people can try it? Is there a README file or anything, or it's pretty easy to understand?
So like actually from the to run it on the switch, for example, you don't need anything special so like you are using the same procedure it was in the original SAI PTF framework.
Okay.
Right. Anton and Vladimir Mitnick, do you want to show the README file and the documentation changes? That will be good.
Yeah, I can actually show. So it's Anton, can you open the SAI repo and pull requests? Official, I mean, Open Compute.
Official one. So
Yes,
maybe you
yes.
will share then. Let's keep it.
Yeah, can do.
Yeah.
1 second.
This is a huge amount of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
Mhm.
So SAI, let's go to the SAI. Yeah, so Christina, you asked about the steps. So we actually pushed the user guide for the SAI PTF, and I know that Chris already followed this and looks like it works. So we have the pull request, and actually there are a few of them related to the SAI Swift, which Chris created. Those one are important for the overlay. And one of them is about the SAI PTF server user guide. It also, in review, I would say we fixed all common there.
1512, okay.
Yes, so we can probably merge this. So let me show the file. Yeah, so there is a PTF user guide. So there is instruction what you need to have it to be able to install it. And also how to install dependencies. We're going to update this guide once it is merged with the Swift version that is supported for the Sonic. And also there is instruction how to generate it, how to run on the server side, because Swift actually, Swift PTF is run on the client. We call it as a client, and Swift server is running on the DOOT. So we call it like a server. So there is example how to run on the device under test, so-called server. And also the instruction what you need and how to run on the test controller to be able to send any traffic and run the test cases. And there is an example command how to run it. So should be pretty straightforward. Maybe there is some, issues. So please let us know. What I would like to add probably, so we already published those changes, and you can run it. So the question is in scope of the dash, where you can run it. Okay, right now. So maybe it makes sense to try on the BMV2. I'm not sure what are the supported list of the features that BMV2 can support, and if you can run it, but maybe it is a good
Starting point.
Starting point, yes, where you can run it.
Yeah, I don't. This is Chris. Thanks for the presentation and all the work. I don't think there's any underlay features in the BMV2. So right now, this is sort of waiting for, let's say a hardware implementation to try it on if someone has, or a software simulation, that a vendor might have. But I don't think the BMV2 isn't going to support these tests at this moment. I don't know if there's really any plans to add underlay features to BMV2 model. There's nothing stopping it, but it's effort, right? It's a lot of work.
Yeah. So anyway, for the overlay, probably it will be the best, choice at the beginning.
Yeah,
so,
this will be real good for. Well, we can start adding overlay tests, and we'll talk about that shortly. But I think if vendors are porting Sonic to their actual platform in the process of that, then this would be a great way to start testing for the basics, right? Without even worrying about stateful services, just to make sure that the Sonic stack's working, that everything is as it should be.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly that. Thank you, Chris. And then we also are looking into supporting VNet use case as well. So when you're working on the BMV2 part to add the test case for VNet, please include us, and we would like to collaborate and sort of share all our findings as well. Yeah.
Wow, this is good timing. great. And Intel been real responsive to my issues and PRs in the SAI repo as I've been implementing the Dash SAI Thrift server. So it's all been, everyone's timing lined up really nicely.
Right. That was great. Thank you very much. So yeah, I think we should work together through the VNet scenario when we get, to that point. Did anyone have questions for the Intel team? I don't see. Hi, Gohan. I see you joined. We were just going over Intel's presentation on the updates for Dash to the PTF framework, and they've done a lot of work to, reduce the number of ports and add a couple of tests. So really, really great. Thank you very much. Anyone else have anything? So these are the notes I took, guys. Hopefully I've got it all down properly and I'll send those out. Now, Chris.
Yeah, we will be upstreaming this to SAI once the rest of the test cases have been completed and pushed as well. But we definitely want to make sure that it's backward compatible so that this code base is used for both switch and Dash devices as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. This is Prince. Thanks, Reshma. So we will do the review of this. Yeah, it's really good that we have the SAI PTF framework ready. Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Anton and Vladimir. That was really cool. I don't know if we wanted to shift gears. Mukesh, did you want to talk about your PR here? We were going to kind of pre-position it for the behavioral model group, but did you want to go over it quickly here?
Hey, Krishna. Yeah, sure. Yeah, just wanted to bring up that I've raised a PR for the to align the current ACL table more with the GNMI. We just wanted to see if Marian and Prince had any comments on this.
Yeah.
Basically, it's like so. Today we just have one flat ACL table, whereas what GNMI has is like ACL group, and then that's the group ID is driven from the ENI for each of the stages, and then within that ACL group there are a bunch of rules for each ACL group. So try to model it that way in P4 and generate SAI APIs.
Okay, so this is just a heads up to Marian and Prince then?
Yeah, and if they've already seen it and if they have any comments or like.
Yeah.
I think Mukesh, I took a look. It looks good to me, so I'll do the full review, maybe like this week.
Sure.
But I think
Yeah.
Marian, just to let Mukesh know that the SAI header file, we have that merged already to OCP repo.
No,
so
we don't have this merged yet. However, I have a very similar change that I was intending to post to Dash repo as well. SAI headers were generated based on that. So I think we are doing the same work. I'll review that.
Oh.
I'll see if
Okay.
maybe we can merge yours, or I'll basically compare yours to mine and see if there is a need for me to raise a pull request. If it generates the same APIs, and maybe we can go with yours as well.
Sure. So one question. So how is it usually done? So we first commit the P4 code and generate SAI from there, and then we commit it to the OCP dash report. I mean OCP report dash branch. Is that the usual way it's done? I didn't know that there was already.
No, there is no particular order. I just haven't submitted my pull request yet. and
Okay.
to the dash branch. There isn't any order or anything like that between SAI and dash.
So usually once this is done, so for the other one, right, the route and the VNet direct and all that. So that also, once it's merged, can we? So I need to push the SAI header file to the OCP.
Yeah.
Yeah. So please, yeah, if you're okay with that, we can actually merge that. Once you take a look and approve that one as well. And then one other question I had from AMD, me and Vijay, we both had this question about how to address the for the ACL group, right? How to address the priority within the group, priority of each rule. That is not yet here. So maybe that's another thing we need to discuss.
Great. Thanks, guys. Chris, did you have an update around the testing that you'd been working on this last week?
Yes.
You had more improvements, yeah, of course.
I don't know about of course. Sometimes it's 2 steps backwards, but usually it's 3 ahead. I'll share my screen to go over. First of all, I want to just go over some PRs that are in the queue so we can get people informed and or prompted. So I'll share my screen. And so assuming people can see this, what I wanted to talk about is a few PRs that are pending of interest to me. First one would be this one here, number 149. It's waiting for Marian to review. It's a fixing a bug. If you run make SAI twice in a row, keeps adding the same content to the auto-generated include files. And BJ came up with a fix. So if we could get that reviewed and approved or commented on, that would be great. And Marian, you're in the list to review because it's your code. And then it'd be nice to merge that into main. This is to fix the permission issues. It's not the elegant long-term solution, but it seems to work well enough for now. Long-term, I have to make sure the container user IDs and everything are sorted out. That's a bigger project with a lot more regression testing. But this fix just does the change mode chmods on all the file directories, and people have tried it out. So I'll probably merge this myself after the meeting because it's already been checked out by at least one person. Let's see, I think just double check this. Whoops, what happened there? Yeah, Mukesh tried it out, but if you have time to try it, that would be great. If not, I'm pretty confident because I've tested it out as well. And then the bigger one I want to do soon is this one. And I'd like to get that merged in because it's a pretty big change in terms of splitting up all the containers. And I want to get that into everyone's workflow sooner rather than later. I think it's ready to go. And I know at least several people have tried it out. So if there's no objections, I'd like to merge that, maybe later today. So if anyone wants to try it out one more time, you need to go in and, pull this branch, get my repo and check out this branch and follow the instructions. I'm pretty comfortable that it's working well. I do want to get that in because it will have an impact on all the other merges and whatnot that are pending. We want to get this kind of out of the way. Accumulating technical debt. And so that's just kind of housekeeping stuff to catch up on everything. And then what I want to do is I want to talk about the latest dev branch that I'm working on and some pretty nice progress. So Reshma and her team was presenting about the PTF test framework, which uses SAI Thrift. Now, one thing we didn't have until now is an actual SAI thrift server that's working in the Dash repo for the behavioral model. And also one that links with the SAI library that we're generating. So I'd like to share that I've got this working as of last night, finally. And so it builds this entire SAI thrift server infrastructure, and it pulls code from the SAI repo and build scripts. So this is actually depending on the work that Intel did last fall, this auto generation. And I'm trying to port it to Dash. I found a few very small, easy to fix issues that are pending in pull requests. And other than me learning a lot of things for the first time, it went pretty well. So we can now build all these containers that are in these shaded boxes and run the entire process. And I actually have a mini demo, but I'll stop in case there's any questions just about the overview here, what it all means. Any questions?
None from me. Anyone else?
You know, just not everyone goes to every meeting that has the context. So this diagram is like too
Always helpful.
confusing. This is a good time to ask for a refresher on what all's going on here. Otherwise, I'll go to the demo and then I'll refer back to this. So let me just go to the demo then. So what I've got here, I've already built everything. Let me these out so you can see them from scratch. Yes, I meant to do that. So I've already built everything according to the make rules, and really it's just make clean and make all. That's all you have to type to build all this. Now I'm going to run the switch, and this is running the behavioral model. So the first thing is to run the switch, soft switch. So I'll run that, and you won't see much activity other than that it, adds some virtual Ethernets, and it's listening. And what this is it's listening on the P4 runtime interface. So this switch right now is listening on this socket for P4 runtime table access commands. Nothing's being done yet though. Now I'm going to run the SAI thrift server, and in the diagram, that's this. Okay, so this is going to run, and that includes the libSci, which was auto-generated from the P4 code. And we talked about that maybe a month or two ago. Marian demonstrated that. So just as a refresher, the P4 code gets compiled, creates P4 info, that gets turned into SAI headers. And that gets bound into libSci, and that code also is generated. And what it does, it takes SAI API calls, like table and attribute commands, and translates them into the equivalent P4 runtime remote procedure calls over this socket. So we have this server running, it's listening here, it's waiting to be told something. So what's going to tell it something is this. Everyone follow so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, feel free to hold up your hand. So I'm going to run that server, and not much is happening yet. This starting SAI RPC server on port 9092. But believe me, to get to this point was a couple weeks of learning. So now we've got this, and it's listening on this socket, 9092. It's listening on port 9092 for SAI thrift commands. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is run some tests. Now, I've also got Wireshark. Let's see. I have Wireshark listening on the P4 runtime socket. I'm going to run all tests. Okay, now that's going to do a bunch of things on all these windows. Let's get. I'm listening on port 1 and port 2. So these are the traffic ports of the switch. And in the diagram, that's this, beat 0 and 2. Now this, I'm doing a TCP dump on the thrift port and on the P4 runtime port. So when I run make all tests, it's going to do a bunch of activity on everything. Okay. So it's initialized people runtime. It sent a bunch of packets. Okay, it just ran a whole bunch of tests, and I'll go through these a little bit. Let's see, let me maximize this. So the first thing it did, let's see, that's installing stuff. Make run all tests. Okay, the first test it did is this VNet out test that Marian wrote many weeks ago, and all it does is a single, maybe a couple of table accesses through SAI. I'm going to point to this diagram again. It's a hand-coded C++ program that makes a SAI access. And it's not really using SAI thrift, but it verifies that the SAI thrift, the SAI to P4 runtime works. So that's the test that's still in there. It was the very first test that was written. And that, all it did was make some calls to add some table entries, and where that is in the code. Okay, this is the C++ code that was kind of the starting point, and I won't walk through it all, but it's just doing some basic SAI APIs, just like you'd see it in, the, let's say, syncd daemon or something. It's low-level SAI accesses, so that works still. Another thing it did, before it did anything, it had to configure the P4 switch with its P4 program, and that's a P4 runtime command called set forwarding pipeline config. So what that's doing is actually downloading a JSON file to BMV2, which it's going to then interpret to run the dash pipeline. And I'll try to document this so you don't have to depend on remembering this meeting or watching the video. I'll write up more about it when I get time. But that's how the switch gets initialized, and you can see that. This is the P4 runtime. This is all this P4 runtime. It's gRPC, and here's an interesting one. Okay, interesting for some people. It's I want to scroll up and get to the top of it if I can. It's downloading JSON to the switch inside of a command that says, "Here's your P4 program." So anyone who's worked with BMV2 at a low level, sorry, this is taking too long. Let me go to Wireshark. I've got Wireshark, and I know it's small font. I can't fix that, but I'm telling it to listen to TCP port 9559. That's the P4 runtime. And you can see all these HTTP2 messages. So here's set forwarding pipeline config. It's downloading all this JSON. You can see it's an HTTP2, and it's a set request, and it's got all this JSON. So that's just a little bit of inner workings for people who want to get into the low level. And then I'll show, let me show you stuff on the thrift port. Oh, that's not working yet. Let's see, let me start over. I'm going to run some tests again, and we'll see pretty soon. It's going to finish this first test where I send traffic, then it's going to send some thrift commands. Okay, it just sent some thrift commands. And one of the commands, if I can find it. Let's see, I'll get an interesting one. Okay. You can't read this probably because it's so tiny, but it says in text here.
Direction.
SAI thrift create direction lookup entry.
Yeah.
Okay. Now the significance of that is, I will show you the test that's running. I've got a new directory in here called PyTest, and I'm just starting a few out. So here's the contents of a PyTest to do a single SAI thrift action. It's a very simple format. I'm marking the test with markers so we can select tests. It's importing PyTest, Snappy, and some SAI thrift headers. And this is all generated by the auto generation framework in the SAI repo. So I'm setting up a direction lookup entry with a couple of parameters, a switch ID and a VNI. And then here's the remote procedure call to the SAI thrift server. So this is client code, and it's telling it, here's the client that was obtained, and it's obtained behind the scenes in a setup script. It's setting the data, the direction lookup entry. It's telling it set outbound direction. Okay, so that's it. This is actually all it takes to program a table, and it's magically going through this whole stack. So those commands I highlighted are basically saying in this script, set up a structure and send it to SAI thrift as a command, make a table entry. libSAI is translating it into the platform code, which is a P4 runtime command to program the switch. So that whole stack is now working in. This code is doing the same thing as this VNet out code, which was here. But this is low-level C and C++. You can see how kind of tedious it is, where you have to set up all this stuff in C++ one step at a time. Right? See all that code?
Mm-hmm.
That's in Python. So let me ask the crowd, how would you like to write your tests? So, and this same code should work in a PTF test. Now, we'll need to do some testing to find out how good the translation is. Can these commands be used exactly in a PTF test? Because if they can, I would propose that we take setup code and put it in a common place that either test framework can invoke. And that'll be an ongoing, work in progress to find out how we do that in the most effective way. But if we're doing things like setting up tables and setting up configurations, we don't need to write the code twice. The overall framework that surrounds all this will be a little bit different. And that's the only thing that should really change from framework to framework. Both frameworks have their advantages that we've talked about. So I think they're both beneficial to have in parallel. So any questions?
Just maybe answer your question. So yeah, so the code will looks pretty much and I would say even the same as you wrote for the PyTest. It will be absolutely the same for the PTF. So there will not be any change, but there will be difference between how you send and receive traffic and how you use the physical ports. That's only one difference probably will be, but the configuration itself will look pretty the same because you are trying to use the SAI thrift library.
Exactly.
And in the PTF we also use the same. So the configuration stuff will be absolutely the same.
Right. So there's going to be a lot of harmony here. And what I haven't done here is actually sent traffic yet. I didn't get that far. But there'll be commands here to, configure packets and send them and then look at the captured packets back and make some assertions about their contents. So that's work to be going forward. But the big thing is this framework actually works finally. And I look forward to collaborating with the Intel folks who are working on the PTF, and we'll figure out how to make sure we work efficiently and that everything we do is reusable. Because ultimately we want to reuse, like configuration commands, we want to reuse them at line range too, right, for hardware tests. So we just need to do some organization, these are all prototypes, kind of science experiments, but once we sort them out and get all the pieces working, we'll figure out the most efficient way to organize everything.
Basically, once we have the SAI, anytime there is a SAI revision, the auto-generated framework for the SAI PTF can generate all the wrapper functions for the SAI. So that is the easiest part. So we don't have to go back and write that. So we focus just on the
it's very nice. And I'll point out one more time, this repo pulls in the SAI repo as a Git submodule, and it's tracked by commit SHA, right? So we always know what we're getting from SAI, and anytime we want to get an updated version of SAI, we just change the reference in the dash repo, and it will then pull in that version of SAI. So it's not going to be uncontrolled where it just gets latest. It'll be specific, so we can proceed in a very orderly, configuration management style. Right now, because I have a few pull requests against SAI to address some small issues I found, I'm actually pulling a Git fork from my own repo that has the PRs already incorporated. Once those get merged into SAI, then I'll switch this over to pull from the SAI repo. And that's how you can always be in some known orderly state. You can work on dev branches and then go back to the mainline repo. You can go back and forth like that. And we always know for any checkout of Dash exactly what we have. All these Docker images are all tracked by version 2, so we don't ever have any doubts about what's in the build. So right now, this is in a dev branch, and I want to play with it another week at least. I'd like to get the SciThrift, the Docker Diet one merged in first, which is about halfway to this point, and then do some more work on this branch. Get some feedback from early adopters who want to pull this fork and try to build it to make sure there's no surprises. And then hopefully we can merge this, and then we'll actually have a starting point to start writing tests. And one thing that's nice, this is my visual VS Code workspace, but when this is all pulled and the submodules expanded, you've actually got, well, this is the SAI directory in Dash. It's not the SAI repo. Under here is the Git submodule of SAI. So anyone who's been in the SAI repo, they'll recognize all these directories. You've actually got a full snapshot of the SAI repo, including PTF test cases, right in this workspace. So it's actually very convenient to be able to work in this mode because you've got everything you need. You don't have to bounce around. And people are not real familiar or comfortable with submodules. We can talk about it more, or you can read up on GitHub. There's references. Be happy to show people some of the nuances of working with submodules. So hopefully in the next couple weeks, we'll be ready to have people start contributing tests. Marianne, I would like to have some help in defining a meaningful VNet test. I mean, Intel wants to help too. So we can get some kind of a configuration and some packets in versus packets out guidance. We now have a framework to write them. So I'll probably write some more tests. We need also, Marian, we need to flesh out the auto generation to ideally do the Git requests. Right now, I think it just does create and set, but I don't think it does read. Does it? Might do delete. I can't remember.
It does create and remove. It does not do set and get.
Okay, so we will need those at some time. I think we can get by with doing tests that just do, create and remove for now. That's certainly good enough to get going. But do you think we'll need those other accessors fairly soon? What's your feeling on that?
Some of them, yeah, like the most trivial example would be admin state for ENI. Needs set.
Got it. So I think the code and everything here is in such a shape that we could come up with a task list and people could volunteer for things like, all right, I'm gonna change the auto generation code to add set or what was it? Set and wasn't removed. The set command and the read command. And that's something I've already seen people dive into some of the things like the auto gen script, right? This one here, VJ jumped in and made some changes to get rid of redundant calls. But just to let people know what's in here under templates, these are Jinja 2 templates. They're not too different from other kinds of templating languages. So someone could get bold and go in and start looking at this code and figure out, well, gee, this is like a template for a callback function. I'm going to add the ones for, let's see, is that the one? this is template code, so it gets generated for every instance of, let's say, a table. So here's SAI status, SAI create, and then this table name's a template placeholder. So the AutoGen framework, this Python code here, already runs this whole template generation and just supplies the parameters, like loops through all these things. So if someone could come up with a template to do the SAI set or was it set? What was the other one I'm thinking of?
Set, get, create, remove.
Set and get. Yeah, we need set and get. So you could come in, and what this is doing, it's actually doing some P4 runtime stuff. Okay, so you have to kind of figure this out, but it's a fun thing to look at. So anyone could volunteer for that work if they are so inclined. Marian, if you had to do it, when do you think you would get to set and get?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be anytime soon, like in this or next month. Not, I don't think it will happen this or next month.
Okay, that I'm glad you answered that question, because it means if anyone's eager to play with this stuff, it's fun, and the framework is pretty much mature enough where you could start playing with this and developing in your workspace. I'm sure Marian would give you some feedback if you ran into issues, or I could try to help. So anyway, that's the status.
Yeah.
Sorry, we almost ran out of time.
Thanks, Chris. So my hand's up, and I guess my hand's up to ask you, Chris, is this something you would early on want to track in the, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah.
In the
Task list.
yeah, like, is that something I mean, it's not really an overarching Dash community, but is it not behavioral model either? But would we want to like track set and get here and see if we got any volunteers, or or we could take this offline?
Yeah, you and I can work offline and try to find the right placeholder, but I think it's time now to start putting all the detailed tasks, so we don't, because there's a big laundry list that we're keeping mentally.
Yeah.
And it's not fun to always file issues.
Or we could always create a GitHub project for testing and then list the tasks there.
Okay, this is more like, I guess you could say it's testing, but it's really, infrastructure for the model itself.
Okay.
That we need to do for testing.
Yeah. Well, if anyone on the call has any ideas of how we could structure it, just hit me up or let me know. And then, so we only have how many minutes left? 5 minutes left, and I do need to talk to Mukesh after this. I had wanted to.
ACR?
I'm sorry?
I think you wanted to talk about the ACR and other things.
Yeah. I'm trying to find the screen where I had it, but Chris and I and Prince collaborated to go ahead and create the container registry. Just kind of wanted to show everyone, but oh, I found it. Okay. So just FYI, this is Prince. Thank you for the pointer, by the way. So we were able to get this created so that we can use it moving into the future for testing and images and things like that. So.
And I'm trying to get an internal resource to start migrating our Dockers to this.
Yeah.
It'll be a bit of a learning experience, but and we can do it gradually.
Yeah. So I guess we can either end or open it up to Q&A for this session. I'm sure everyone's got a 10 o'clock. So did anyone have questions or Q&A for this session?
Just one question to the Chris. So in the CI, so are you going to use the PyTest, or you're planning to shift to the PTF?
I think I'll probably focus on PyTest, but I think we can also, these tests we should be able to do in PTF as well. But I'm going to use PyTest because I'm going to try to be using Snappy for the traffic generator, and PTF tends to rely on Scapy. But I think that's flexible. I'll probably do some of each just because I want to brush up on my PTF skills. But we can always talk offline and negotiate some split if you want.
Yeah, I'm thinking if for example, if more test cases will be available on the PTF side, so I suppose for the CI it may really make sense to run the PTF. Right.
Yeah, but we have all the existing PTF tests don't really apply because they're all kind of underlay. So it'd be new tests
Yeah, I
anyway
understand.
for overlay. And so based on what we talked about earlier, we'll try to write it in a way where we can reuse the configuration part common to either test. And we should try both. I like to try and experiment to see how things go before we
Yeah, and you're using the auto-generated test framework anyway, right? So
Yes.
that's the part that we have implemented, especially
Yeah.
for Dash. So when we
Yeah.
have a new SAI, we generate the Python test wrappers automatically.
Yeah.
So that can be used for overlay and underlay equally. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the actual difference is just a little bit of, the framework around it. But, what I say is we should try a few of each and see how it goes. And then, we can course correct.
Sure, sure. And we will be anyway upstreaming it to SAI, and it will be something that is, what we will support. And it will be equally used for both Switch and Dash devices. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
So
I'm
just
gonna stop the record. Oh, go ahead, Chris, sorry.
final request again, if people can try out that Docker diet if they want. And if I don't get any feedback by the end of the day, I'll probably be, trying to merge it.
I'm going to stop the recording, everyone. This was just a huge session, a lot of work and learning, and a lot of effort went into this one. I wish Gerald had been here to see this. I'm going to make him watch the recording because it was awesome. He was over doing a visit in California the last couple of days. So, but I'll get with him later. And thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the